Good morning and welcome. For 23 years now, the Life and Faith team has been bringing you stories from faith communities throughout southwestern Ontario. Thank you for that, and we're so glad that you're making us part of your day today. We begin today with Archdeacon Richard Salt, the newly appointed Director for Mission and Ministry for the Diocese of Huron. Next, we learn about the role of the United Church Women as Matthew Penny sits down for a chat with their president, Marilyn Mitchell. And to round out the show, we learn about the establishment of the Chair of Islamic Studies at Huron University College in London, Ontario. The Anglican Diocese of Huron is aware that change is needed, and so they're creating strategies to carry the church well into the future. We'd like to introduce Archdeacon Richard Salt, the man chosen to lead the way in his new role as Director for Mission and Ministry.
I had no idea when Bishop Terry phoned me in the spring of the year 2009 and invited me to be a part of the Strategic Planning Task Force, where it would lead for me personally. During that year, I worked with an exciting group of people who came from all different parts of the diocese and probably from many different perspectives. And as the year went on and the plan emerged, all of us became more and more excited about its possibilities and about the future. I believe that God has clearly called me to this. Bishop Bob announced the theme of the Synod for the year 2010 to be out of exile. And the theme verse for this Synod perhaps became those words from Isaiah, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it?" I believe that God is indeed doing a new thing for us in the Diocese of Huron. But as I come into this role of Director for Mission and Ministry, I come with experience that I believe is very helpful. One of the clear visions and dreams that I have about ministry is that I want desperately to help church and culture communicate. Well, this job really brings me full circle. When I was 16 years old, I thought of myself as the culture trying to communicate with the church. And now, as the new Director for Mission and Ministry, I find that I'm helping and hoping to help the church communicate with the culture. I believe that God has clearly called me to this, and I'm excited about it.
Richard will be tasked with engaging each of us in relationship to the strategic plan of the Diocese of Huron.
Well, the strategic vision and redirection for the Diocese of Huron has three specific focuses. I'd like to speak for a few moments about the creating an external focus on mission. I grew up in a pastor's home, in a church family. My dad was an Anglican priest, in fact he still is, and it was a church that was very different than ours is today. He might not agree with everything I'm about to say, but it seems to me that church was a whole lot easier in those days. You could make mistakes and life would go on because people were still committed to the church. In today's world, it is very different. People consider themselves often to be spiritual but not religious. They tend to be much more anti-institutional. And so if things aren't going well in the church, they are quite anxious to pick up perhaps and move on and do something different. They don't necessarily see the church as an important part of their spiritual life. But today the church is just among one of many different groups that are competing for people's time on Sunday. Well, in this new era, we will not succeed by doing what we've always done, only doing it better. We need to come to the place where we can make a difference in the life of the community. Last year's Synod talked about something we called fresh expressions, and it showed all kinds of examples of ways that churches are using to connect with the community around and to make a difference in their community. As a part of the strategic vision, we will be inviting every congregation to engage in strategic planning that will lead to an intentional reaching out to the community around. Now, for some people, strategic planning is a scary thing. In fact, I've even heard it called voodoo. But I want to tell you that strategic planning is not really scary. Strategic planning is simply setting some goals about what we'd like to do and then figuring out ways to do it. Part of a good strategic plan will include establishing who is going to actually bring the plan to pass and how people are going to be accountable for that. Strategic planning is just simply good management. Leadership in this new era that I've been talking about is going to have to be different. In many different organizations and enterprises in Canada, we find that they have just dumped more work on their leadership and on their employees and set in place all kinds of new systems and so on and so forth. But that doesn't work because people can only do so much in a day and they get frustrated when too much is asked of them. So what we need to be doing is focusing our efforts more. Clergy have been well trained in the past to act as pastors, and I'm confident in the clergy of the Diocese of Huron. I'm confident that they are very good pastors who have the ability to sit with people in their times of need and comfort them in their times of sorrow and all of those different things. But what we need to do is to sharpen our skills of leadership. We need to train and retrain clergy and laity alike for their work. We need to give them the tools that they need to face this new era, and we need to help them become energized. One of the other things we need to do is to make sure that we have the best fit possible between clergy skills and congregational needs. The third focus of the strategic vision and redirection is the effective use of resources. The Who is My Neighbor report has helped us to understand from a demographic perspective where our strengths and weaknesses lie. For many, this report was very difficult to take. Many congregations were termed as final generation congregations, and that put fear in our hearts about the eventual closing of our churches. Some even believed that to be labeled a final generation church meant that your church would be closed by the diocese at some point in the near future. This plan is not and has never been about closing churches. But we will be working with congregations that are struggling in order to take positive action and redirection before they are forced to by the circumstances of their lives. We will also be working with congregations where we see great hope and great possibilities for the future in order that we will be able to be the very best that we can be for the Lord.
We have heard Richard's calling to this position. We have learned of the engagement of the strategic plan. And now we hear, with some passion I might add, Richard's vision of the way forward.
We've talked a great deal about coming out of exile. And part of coming out of exile for the Jews was the rediscovery of their relationship with God. In the 8th chapter of Nehemiah, the people gathered together while Ezra the priest read to them from the book of the law they had found. The people were weeping on that day because they were so moved by the word of the Lord. But Nehemiah said to them, "Go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks, and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is sacred to our Lord. Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." Certainly, spiritual renewal and spiritual invigorment is an important part of any plan that will move us to the future. Now I know that for some people, whenever we talk about spiritual renewal, antennas start to go up. It brings up questions about whether or not it will be liberal in its leaning or conservative. The last decades of the Church have been very consumed by discussions and even arguments and disagreements between those that call themselves liberals and those that call themselves conservatives. It has gone even further than simple disagreement. It has gone to the point of different groups wondering who will be able to win this battle and who will ultimately take over the church. That's a kind of a form of triumphalism, and it really has no place in our midst as a Christian community. It is not the way forward for the church. Well, what kind of change are we then talking about? What kind of spiritual renewal? I would think of three things that come to mind immediately. The first is membership to discipleship. The second would be contribution to commitment. And the third would be inward thinking to outward thinking. When I think about membership becoming discipleship, I think about the fact that we are very good in considering ourselves to be members of congregations. In fact, we are really often quite committed to the life of the church family in which we find ourselves. But Jesus called us not to be members, but rather instead to be disciples, to be people who are prepared to pick up and walk away just to follow him, not even knowing where he was going to take us. The third thing I talked about was inward thinking to outward thinking. When I was growing up, the mission field was something that was thousands of miles away. The reality about today is that the mission field is right next door to us. It's in our neighborhood and in our communities. When I was growing up, we didn't think of that as a mission field. Well, times have changed, and the church is only one generation away from extinction. If we're not prepared to reach out to the community around and to proclaim the good news that we have been made caretakers of, then the church will die. We have talked a fair bit about the concept of returning from exile. And the first thought we have when we think about returning from exile is that this is a joyous and a wondrous time and people return with joy and dancing. But if we read the whole story of the people returning from exile in Babylon back to the promised land and to Jerusalem, we realize that there were very many difficult moments along the way. And I wouldn't want to pretend that all the things we need to do as church in the Diocese of Huron are going to be easy and resolved in a moment. They're going to take patience and hard work and probably a little bit of retooling and rethinking of the plan along the way. But to all who want to follow Jesus, I say, let's join hands together and walk together with the Lord. As Isaiah said, forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it?
The challenge has been placed before us. As we move to Synod 2011 and into our future, we are called as one to dream, to vision what we can be, how we can engage the culture, how we can be part of the new thing God is doing in our midst.